What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, and today we're going to talk through my top 10 fantasy football lessons learned from week 12 as we look forward to week 13 in the fantasy football playoffs ahead. This is where I break down what I believe are the top 10 most important fantasy trends, usage, stats that stuck out to me so you don't have to scroll through box scores for hours on end. As always, if you enjoy this video, make sure you go down below, subscribe, leave a like, and the first thing we'll get into, as always, is the world famous rookie receiver report sponsored by Underdog Fantasy. They keep the lights on down here in the base. Make sure you check them out. Use promo code RONDOM at your first deposit up to $1,000. You'll get a free pick'em in the pick'em lobby, 0.5 total yards with Justin Herbert. They have a ton to offer there in the pick'em lobby where you have, of course, NFL, you have NBA, you have college basketball with Feast Week. I imagine, right, we're going to have promos for Feast Week. I imagine these promos are across the board here. But maybe there's going to be some college basketball. I really couldn't tell you, but there's going to be profit boosts. There's going to be a ton of stuff going on Underdog Fantasy all week from Wednesday 11:27 to Saturday 11:30. Make sure you check it out. Make sure you hop in some drafts, do some pick'ems, all of that good stuff. Links will be in the description and the comment section down below. Promo code RON. Now, of course, this is the rookie receiver report. We have the last 3 weeks of route percentage. So how often are these rookie receivers going on the field and running a route on a pass play? Just how involved in the offense are you? Targets per out run, your volume on a per route basis, yards per out run, your efficiency on a per route basis when it comes to yardage, first downs per out run. Are you an engine of the offense? Are you pushing, the offense forward instead of just getting big plays and broken coverage? PFF grade, how do you look on film? Anything over an 80 plus is really, really good. In terms of historical success. And then your change. What did your PFF grade change from last week to this week? And first up, you can see this was not the best Brock Bowers game. Now, of course, he still is at the top of the mountain. 85 plus PFF grade, 2+ yards per out run, everything across the board. He hits all the thresholds we're looking for. 10% plus first downs per out run, 2+ yards per out run, 20% targets per out run, and he's a tight end, and his quarterbacks are garbage. But it's funny, right? He gets 9 targets here, 4 catches, 38 yards. So he doesn't get home for you in redraft. His PFF grade takes a bit of a hit here. He was at 90 even last week, which was Odell Beckham territory for a receiver. There's really nothing to worry about here. Really, the only thing to worry about is Gardner Minshew breaks his collarbone, but we've seen him produce with all kinds of quarterbacks here, whether this is Desmond Ridder or Aiden O'Connell still coming back from his injury. Brock Bowers, really not all that concerned with. Then, of course, Ladd McConkey plays tonight. Brian Thomas Jr. was on bye. Then you have Malik Neighbors. And we'll talk about this one later because I want to break down the Giants as a whole without Tommy DeVito. But, man, this was his second lowest graded game of the season, Malik Neighbors. Only dropped him down minus 1.8. He hasn't scored a touchdown since week 3 at this point, and it's just very brutal with Tommy DeVito, without Daniel Jones. Huge downgrades from Malik Neighbors, where now he's probably like a back-end wide receiver 2 at best in redraft. And Dynasty, I haven't really flinched on him as like a top 3 receiver in Dynasty moving forward, or top 4 or 5 if you want to put some others in there. Then we have Marvin Harrison Jr. And this is another one, Malik Neighbors, that, it's late season here, so we're definitely talking redraft, but then also Dynasty as we look forward out of like a long view. With both of these guys, all right, we drafted them with very lofty expectations in redraft. They're both absolutely fine as it pertains to Dynasty. Like, they're doing everything you could possibly want. If you go out there, look at the greatest receivers of all time, it's not always going to be a monster year. Like, I think this is a great representation here from Dynasty Zoltan on Twitter. When you look at the first round receivers through their first 11 games, having about 500 to 600 receiving yards, you get a mixed bag. But in the mixed bag, you get Larry Fitzgerald, DeAndre Hopkins, Calvin Johnson, Dez Bryant. Remember, yes, we have the Jamar Chases and the Justin Jeffersons and the Puka Nakuas and the Odell Beckhams of guys who come onto the scene and are monsters right away. But some of the greatest receivers of all time, and you look at rookie year production, like Calvin Johnson won't pop there. I don't think Jerry Rice will really pop there. Of course, Larry Fitzgerald is on this list, DeAndre Hopkins, Dez Bryant. So sometimes you're not just going to, from day one, be a monster. And when we talk about these receivers from a long view, sometimes it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? Would you rather have Odell Beckham Jr.'s career, or would you rather have, DeAndre Hopkins or Calvin Johnson's, where instead of flaming out early, you just have a long, illustrious career? Now, of course, OBJ had some, injuries and some other stuff go against him. Not that, if those things didn't hit, could he have just been a Hall of Famer regardless? Sure, but it's not always going to be right away, year one. So I think you could probably say that Marvin Harrison Jr. was drafted was overdrafted. Malik Neighbors probably as well at this point. But receiver's been so bad, I don't think Neighbors has been a fine pick if you got him in like that third round range where he was in home leagues. Marvin Harrison Jr. was like a second rounder in home leagues. You could probably call him a bust at this point in redraft. There was just really lofty expectations there. He had a good quarterback. Everything was going for him. But Trey McBride has just kind of been the receiver one here. Trey McBride had 15 targets to Marvin Harrison Jr.'s 6. Marvin Harrison Jr. had 3 catches, 47 yards. He's shown flashes, and again, across the board, like these are fine numbers. These are not numbers where I would be concerned about Marvin Harrison Jr. I would still have him as like a fringe. I'd have him as like a top 8 dynasty wide receiver moving forward, like top 10. I think that that's absolutely fine for Marvin Harrison Jr. And who he is. Now, after that, we actually have Devon Bailey as we go here. These are all sorted by PFF grade. All of these guys have 130 or more routes run. And Devon Bailey continues to impress me. He's now at over 20% targets per out run. That's a threshold we look for. Just shy of 2 yards per out run with a rookie quarterback, right? That's higher than Marvin Harrison Jr. with Kyler. 9% first downs per out run. And again, this isn't to push down Marvin Harrison Jr., but I'm using this as like a barometer, and he's literally right there. He's pacing with Marvin Harrison Jr. on a per route basis. Now, of course, Marvin Harrison Jr. pedigree. He's also like 5 years younger than Devon Bailey, but it's just very impressive what he's doing. He also improved his PFF grade by 3.4 this week. He had a great game. Now, Courtland Sutton, of course, overshadowed the entire thing with the Denver Broncos. He scores 2 touchdowns. He's amazing. But Devon Bailey gave you 6 catches, 80 yards. I think he also had a 23% target share as well. So he looks really good. Now, of course, I always say this with Bailey. In Dynasty, I don't know what to do with him because he's going to be like 25, 26. He's like a very, very old rookie. But in redraft, when we talk about rookie receivers having higher upside as we move forward in the fantasy season, Devon Bailey, sneaky league-winning upside with Devon Bailey, we'll probably touch on tomorrow in the waiver wire video. Then we'll bounce around to Rome Odunze here. This one you hate to see because Caleb had an amazing game, 2 touchdowns, 300-plus receiving or passing yards. This was a spot where Rome Odunze should have been great. And he commanded volume. That's what he's been doing recently. He now has back-to-back games of 10 or more targets, which is nice, but he turns that into just 5 catches for 39 yards. So Rome Odunze has been such a tough eval here. His per-out numbers are bad, but Caleb and Shane Waldron and everything there has been awful. He's also commanding targets, but it's been a high-volume offense. And then he's also next to DJ Moore, Keenan Allen. So there's a lot going on here with Rome Odunze. I still feel fine about him long-term. Probably a little bit lower than I did when he was drafted, right? Because this is probably one of the, bottom-ith percentiles. But I also think that there's a lot of context needed around Odunze. And I also think that he is still a guy with late season upside. If he can just deliver, 10 targets is no joke, right? We're talking about Marvin Harrison Jr. He had just 6 targets. If Marvin Harrison Jr. had 10 targets, maybe we're dealing with something else in terms of his stat line. So it's tough to keep on preaching patience with Rome Odunze, but that's kind of where I'm at here. And then in terms of the big name guys, we also have Xavier Worthy. He is on. It's very tough for him. He is so tough for me to wrestle with because he comes out here yesterday, 6 targets, 4 catches, 46 yards. I mean, that's okay, right? That's fine for a rookie receiver. That's, I just said Marvin Harrison Jr. had a similar stat line and Rome Odunze had a similar stat line, and not to worry, but his per out stats are brutal, right? We're talking under 60 PFF grade. We're talking 6% first downs per out run. We are talking 1.05 yards per out run. That is brutal stuff. And then 15.2% targets per out run as a part-time receiver on this Chiefs offense. Now, this was his 4th best PFF graded game and his 4th best yards per out run game. The issue is that he had a 60.7 PFF grade and a 1.35 yards per out run. So those are both bad numbers for your 4th best game in your career at this point. He is still young. If you're optimistic, these last 2 weeks are the best that he's looked since the first 4 weeks of the season when it looked like he had a lot of promise. On the other side, when you look at the season as a whole, it's still pretty rough here, just a hair over 1 yards per out run. Then we have the rest category. A.D. Mitchell, he plays 30% of the routes. That's because Josh Downs goes down with an injury. A.D. Mitchell still does A.D. Mitchell things, 9 routes. He still gets 2 targets there, so 2 divided by 9 is over 20% targets per out run. 1 catch, 10 yards, a first down. That's what he does. He comes on the field, he gets open, he commands a couple targets, he gets a first down, and then they say, all right, you're done, A.D. Mitchell. But sucks because we love Josh Downs, but if Josh Downs' injury is something that's going to keep him out of games moving forward, whether that's a game or 2 games, whatever it could be, it's still early in the week, A.D. Mitchell will be a guy that benefits from that. And we can get these routes from 30% to 70% plus. then we're cooking, because these are very, very good numbers. 27% targets per route run is second behind only Malik Neighbors. 1.72 yards per route run is pretty damn good. 8.8% first downs per route run, pretty dang good. So A.D. Mitchell, someone to keep an eye on as we monitor the injury reports with Josh Downs. Then we have the Panthers, and they're right next to each other. Xavier Legette, JT Sanders. JT Sanders, it's a huge, huge bummer. He has his best PFF grade change, I think maybe of the year in terms of PFF grade. He gets 3.7 here, higher than anybody on this list, higher than Devon Vele. And he had a brutal, brutal injury where he does kind of a somersault. He lands on his neck. Really, really bad injury. It seems like it's not as bad as it looked, but still very sad for him. Xavier Legette, he hasn't been producing great numbers, right? He's still getting, he has every game he's going to have around 40 receiving yards and maybe a touchdown is kind of what it looks like. It just seems like Bryce Young is leaning a lot more on the veterans. For whatever reason, David Moore is going crazy with 80 plus yards and a touchdown in some weeks. Adam Thielen's back in the mix, but Xavier Legette just giving you something and mid per route run stats. That's fine in terms of long-term redraft. It's looking shaky on him being a late season league winner, but we shall see. And then I also think we'll see Jalen Coker. He was hurt in this one. When he comes back, he'll kind of muddy some things as well. And then the last rookie I think is worth talking about is Ricky Pearsall. This one's tough. We'll talk about the 49ers at the end of this video, and it's just not great, right? We have Brandon Allen in there now. You have to assume this is a team that is backs against the wall, bottom of the NFC West, trying to win games. They're probably not trying to lean on Ricky Pearsall in high leverage situations. So he runs 22 routes, he gets 0 targets, and all of his per route numbers are really suffering because of it. After his first 2 or 3 games, there was some promise there, and now we've definitely downgraded from that. I don't know if games mattering more is a fair knock of how is he going to produce if they're not going to trust him because they need to win games, and it's maybe if he was just better at football. So I'm not sure what to think about Ricky Pearsall, but he's definitely trending towards kind of being a year one face planner, which we really don't want from these round one type of guys, right? When we look back at guys, of the past, like Quentin Johnston, we look back at people who just didn't produce in year one. It usually does not work out very well for them. Now, moving on from that, we have some reflection here. And I can't stress this enough. I will never run from an L. All right. One of our biggest L's we took this season, and one that is honestly, if I'm being straight up with you guys, has kind of made this season not very fun for me or any of you guys that followed us very closely. But our second lesson learned is titled Lessons Learned from a Saquon Fader, right? You guys probably all have seen this video in this thumbnail. This was at the end of draft season. I put out 7 busts you'll regret drafting early in 2024. Best ball. I had Saquon as a second round pick, and I told you guys, hey, a lot of these sites like ESPN and Sleeper have Saquon as the 110, the 111. I'm not really trying to pay that price. I'd rather pay a mid-second. I had to put him on the thumbnail. It did well views-wise, but we have not paid the price. I definitely get a couple of comments here and there from you guys. It's definitely something that those of you guys who aren't subscribers of the channel will probably attach to me for a few years, which is a tough reality to live with. I will not lie. As the guy who was kind of an idiot and did not trust Saquon. Now, let's actually pump up Saquon here because it's not, I don't want to make it about me, all right? Saquon Barkley is having a monster season. I think it's actually a really good lesson learned in terms of the legendary running back upside that we chase. He is having what I would call maybe the most unique legendary running back season of all time, where he, in this modern day era where we don't see 2,000-yard rushers, right? We saw Derrick Henry a few years ago. He is now on pace, right? Last night, he had 255 yards, 9.8 yards per carry, 47 receiving yards, 2 touchdowns. He dropped 45 points last night, depending on the site you're using. You can see here, I just sort of gathered together a bunch of really good stats. You have Ian Hartitz at the top. RBs with the most yards per carry in a single season with 200 or more carries. Jim Brown was 6.4. Jamal Charles was 6.4. Saquon Barkley, 6.2. So he is operating in terms of yards per carry, in terms of efficiency there on a Jamal Charles level, which we had never seen previously. Then you have J.J. Zachariason below that. Saquon has scored 30 or more PPR points in 5 games this year. Since 2011, only Christian McCaffrey in 2019, 8 times, Todd Gurley in 2018, 7, and David Johnson in 2016, 6, have been able to score 30-plus PPR points in at least 5 games. And we're, again, only through week 12. So he is having one of those seasons, right? The legendary running back season. We're going to look back on this like we did with McCaffrey, like we did with Todd Gurley, like we did with David Johnson. Saquon is having that right now. And Chris O'Brien points out here, he is currently on pace for 2,151 rushing yards, which is nuts. 397 receiving yards, 2,548 total yards, and that would be on pace to break the rushing yards record and the total yards from scrimmage record. Now, of course, he has one extra game, but still in the modern era where we haven't seen a running back even really sniff those numbers, it's bonkers. Now, like I said, I wrote down some notes for this. I am always very transparent. I will never delete a video and act like that take never happened. I actually tweeted, and we actually talked about this maybe on like week 4 lessons learned, where I said, I waved the white flag. Like, he is certainly having an amazing season, but we've gone from 20 plus points per game, like, oh man, I wish I drafted that guy, to, oh, this is a legendary running back season, and if you don't have him on your team, you're probably not winning your fantasy football league. Like, that is what we have entered now. He is at, where do I have this? He is at 24 points per game, which is, a legendary season marker. He is there easily. He's ahead of Mixon, Derrick Henry. Like, he is now, this week, of 46.2 PPR points, has now widened that gap to the point where now he is the one. He is the odds-on favorite. I put him at like minus 500 to be the legendary running back this season. It was Saquon. Now, again, I waved the white flag back here September 22nd. I will not run from an L. What can we learn from this? Now, in terms of the take and why I didn't like Saquon, I did want to kind of outline this and then also poke holes in it as we move forward. Because I think, again, I've only been it's not only, right? I've been doing this for like 4 years, but I do always want to try and get better and move forward. And again, it does suck. I feel like, this is easily my worst fantasy football season ever in terms of what I'm doing in home leagues, what I'm doing in the high stakes stuff we drafted in the summer, in terms of best ball. It's all been brutal. I feel like I let you guys down as well. If you guys watch the videos, the channel, I imagine a lot of you guys might not have gotten Saquon either. And this is the take. This is where I was at. I do want to make it clear that, like, yes, I put him on the thumbnail of the video, but it's not like I had him, RB 12 and like outside the top 2 rounds. I had him right here. You can see this is August 28th. I had him as my RB 7. I had him in the rankings that I put on Patreon at the 18 spot. So the 206 behind Achane, Marvin Harrison Jr., Lico Collins, Drake London. And the idea there was probably not sound. Now, of course, we did draft him, a pity 4.9% of underdog leagues. Again, 0% of my redraft leagues. So this has been pretty brutal. Now, in terms of why I was actually low on him, is because I was told, I get a lot of comments, stop caring about ADP. ADP is dumb, just draft your guys. And he just wasn't one of my guys, and this was the reason. First, he didn't project anywhere near, if he was someone you could project like 1,600 rushing yards, then sure, you can project him to be a difference maker in fantasy football. But this is underdogs. Shout out to Hayden Winks. He does like these preseason rankings, but this is the only place that I could find the projections where like underdog puts out pick 'em higher lowers, and his higher lower was 1125 rushing yards. He has crushed that with 1392 at this point, and 7.5 rushing TDs. He's now at 10 through just 11 games. So he has crushed all of his projections. And I will say, I put the thumbnail out, I put the video out, but we had him at the 206 as the RB7. A lot of sites had him similarly. Like Hayden here, and this isn't to put any smut on underdog's name. I love Josh. I love Hayden. 19th as like the RB9. Now, I think that these are best ball rankings. That was about where he was getting drafted, but exactly, like same thing in the mid-second sounded about right. This, again, was a 27-year-old running back, didn't have amazing projections on paper, had ACL injury in the past, lower body, ankle injuries as well, and the idea was that he needs touchdowns and receptions to get to legendary running back seasons. He is not on pace to get that in terms of his preseason stuff. Now, the beauty of Saquon, and while I'll give him all the respect in the world, it's despite not having receptions or the goal line work, he's just saying, what, screw you. I will score from 50. I will score from 70. It will not matter. This is why, again, I'm calling it one of the most unique seasons for a legendary running back I can imagine. We look here, 12 carries inside the 5 for Jalen Hurts, 11 for Saquon. And this was, the expectation. But you can see here, in terms of inside the 5, we knew like both Hurts and Saquon would be top 10. Saquon has just 3 touchdowns inside the 10-yard line. He has 10 rushing touchdowns on the season. And if you want to back that up, he has 5 inside the 20. So that means that he has 7 touchdowns from outside the 5 and he has 5 touchdowns from outside of the 20, where he is just getting these breakaway runs. He's an absolute monster. And then we look here at the legendary running backs since 2010. We have 19 with 22.5 plus points per game. And it's amazing. In terms of running backs that have hit 22.5 plus points per game at age 27 or older, Saquon is 27 this year. It is Saquon this year. It is McCaffrey last year, who McCaffrey has, he's been doing this forever. And then Jamal Charles, an efficiency outlier. That's what Saquon is in right now. You can see as well, he has 27 receptions. He's on pace for 42. That would be the lowest on this list, below Dalvin Cook in 2020. So he's not catching passes. He does not have the goal line work. And he is just crushing everything with like a 6.2 yards per carry, on pace for 2,000 plus rushing yards. And then how do we kind of move forward with this? And this is kind of what I would say is this right here. Very simple. You guys told me, good player on good team. How could you, Saquon on the Giants sucked. Moving forward, he'll be on the Eagles. He'll be better. And that was very simple. And I think I'm probably too focused on youth and pass catching, right? I'm looking for Devon Achane. I'm looking for guys that are young, because again, you look at this list, and most of these guys, the guys at the top, McCaffrey's 23, Todd Gurley's 24, Le'Veon Bell 24, Gurley 23, David Johnson 25. Then you get to Jamal Charles and the later career situation. So I'm hacking for upside on the younger guys, but that doesn't mean that you can just put Saquon in a spot where you're not drafting him, you're not respecting him. And I think as well, when we look at the guys that I was drafting, I really can't blame myself for Jonathan Taylor. I think a lot of people were taking Jonathan Taylor. It was a similar bet, right? Guys who's going to get squeezed on the goal line and in reception department because of a scrambling quarterback, but he could have a monster efficiency season. I'm fine with that. And then Achane and Gibbs, right? Gibbs, youth, pass catching upside on a good offense. Same thing with Devon Achane. He just got sniped by a Tua injury. He has like 23 plus points per game in games with Tua. It's just that, he had the injury bug. But this is what I also wanted to say. And I will say, we're going to touch on this. I'll have an end of season breakdown where I go through all my lessons learned from the 2024 season. But I figured it'd be like, it's topical to bring it up now. But I think something I want to incorporate moving forward is Mike Clay projections, where I use them a ton. I use them so much that you guys tell me stop using them. But we look here at, if you just look at the running backs and wide receivers, now, of course, I get positional scarcity, what positional value means, right? If you just want to use projections, then Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen would have been the 101, right? Because he's going to score the most points. But running back and wide receiver, most of the time will be ending up in your flex. You can start, 3 to 4 of them in a given week. So they're about even in terms of their positional value. In the past, I might have said really leaning towards wide receiver, but I do want to challenge that moving forward. Again, this is a weird year. We'll break it all down in our last lessons learned video for this season. But I do think that it was very egregious is what I'll call it. Now, I always felt with these Mike Clay projections, I saw the vision with Devon Achane. I was not believing 15.1. I would have had him more in that 18 points per game range. I don't know that there's a single reality where I would have drafted Saquon over Devon Achane. And again, I don't think that was a bad call. I really don't. 23.2 points per game in games where Tua is healthy. Saquon's at 24 right now. So they would have been both like in a legendary running back kind of like race there. It's just that, of course, there was like a 6-game stretch for Achane without Tua. Now, with Saquon, his projection for Mike Clay was 18. Now, these shouldn't be gospel, but you can't justify drafting 15 point per game projection receivers, right? Like, I like Nico Collins a ton, but you probably can't justify that based on his preseason projections with Stephon Diggs, with Tank Dell. Same thing with Drake London. We had never seen it before. Same thing with Marvin Harrison Jr. as a rookie. These guys just simply can't be ranked ahead of Saquon. So moving forward, like when I make rankings moving forward, I definitely need to have something like this pulled up just to, keep things in check of you can move Saquon down, right? Like I would have preferred, Gibbs at 17 points per game. I'm not saying that my rankings would just be this list straight up and down, but at a certain point, you can only put these running backs that project for 18 plus points per game so low until it's very obtuse. And I think that is a lesson to be learned moving forward. And then I also think running back efficiency is very tricky. We've looked at FPOE per game in the past, stuff like missed tackles forced, but the reality of the situation is that stuff is not predictable or predictive year over year. And I think that I need to focus more on team total, right? How good is the offense and the offensive line for running backs moving forward? Of course, with the Eagles were a top 10 scoring unit in terms of preseason projections. They've now kind of crushed that. And then, of course, their offensive line would have been top 5 in any rankings video, or rankings article. So just some things that I want to put into the world as lessons learned from the whole Saquon thing. It does suck. Again, brutal season for your boy. But there's really only thing that can be done is to just take this one on the chin, move forward, be better for it. But let's break down the rest. And again, I will never run from a bad take. It happens to the best of us. Third, as we just zero back in on week 12, we have the Tommy DeVito-led Giants. And this one was rough. Man. This one, like, it's just it's sad to see, Daniel Jones choke up at the press conference and then leave. And, he asked for his release. And then we look here at the stats, fellas, and it is really bad. Now, the Giants' offense wasn't even that good with Daniel Jones, but you really feel it now. Your passing yards per game goes from 190 to 169. Rushing yards per game goes from 120 to 76. Points per game goes from 15.6 to 7. Plays per game goes from 65.2 to 56. So play volume down, scoring down, yardage down, everything's down. The offense is now completely in the basement. It hurts everybody. We talked about Malik Neighbors. He's now like a fringy wide receiver 2 that you can't trust. And then it's now even hurting Tyrone Tracy, where he was like a really fun late season upside type of guy. And now he is in an awful situation. And then he also got benched in this game. He fumbled in this game, which I like Dable, but man, if your season is so lost that you have sent Daniel Jones on his way, I can't say that I can wrap my head around punishing your young players so aggressively. But Singletary is his guy, and they did pay for Singletary instead of Saquon, so I can kind of justify it, and just being like any reason to give Saquon or to give Singletary some touches would make some sense. But Singletary or Tracy, according to the Fantasy Life utilization report here, goes from 79% of the snaps before the bye in week 10 to 41%. His routes go from 62% to 20%, but the funny thing is he still got the same amount of carries. Like 58% of the rush attempts, then 56% in terms of just his carries. It's just he wasn't used in the passing game in this one. He was benched for the fumble. I have to assume that his role will bounce back, but now the efficiency is going to be very tough with Tommy DeVito at quarterback. So he gets downgraded to like an RB3 as well. And then we can talk about Mike Evans' return in terms of this Giants game in general. Mike Evans comes back, and we look at K. Dotton's target share per game without Mike Evans in the lineup. Thank you to J.J. Zacharyson. You have 28.3% target share for K. Dotton without Evans to 15.9% with Mike Evans. So you can definitely downgrade K. Dotton. Evans is definitely going to be someone you can count on moving forward. He was on a snap count only at 60% of the snaps, but he did have 5 catches for 68 yards. And should be kind of like Nico Collins, where Nico Collins in the primetime game wasn't fully unleashed versus Dallas. He did have, and you hate to see that, he had the long touchdown. He gets called back. And then this past week, he was fully unleashed. So that should be Mike Evans moving forward. And then we can talk about the Tampa Bay backfield as well, where this was a great game for Bucky Irving. Now, of course, this is the utilization report. I don't know why I'm struggling with that. From Fantasy Life. It's a great thing they offer. I think it's by subscription. But with Bucky Irving here, you can see when we look at Rachaad White versus Bucky Irving, that week 10 snap share, 59% to 48%, that flipped here, where Bucky Irving now outsnaps a healthy Rachaad White, and not only outsnaps him, but I red boxed the routes. That is huge. He is now the preferred passing down back, where Rachaad White is just at 34% of the routes to Bucky Irving's 59%, and then Bucky Irving was also out there for 100% of the 2-minute drill snaps. It seems like third down duty will go to Rachaad White, 2-minute drill stuff will go to Bucky Irving, and then some of that will slant towards Bucky in terms of running routes, and that's really good for Bucky Irving. He is now like the lead guy, and he made good on that with 12 carries for 87 yards and a touchdown, 6 catches, 64 yards through the air. He is seemingly looking like a league winner down the stretch for the Buccaneers. And then I will say as well, they kind of forced Sean Tucker into the game. They gave him I think 2 goal line carries. He converted on one of them, but he still had just like 8% of the snaps. So I'm not all that concerned about Sean Tucker moving forward. Then we have the Colts. Last week was pretty nice for the Colts, right? They play against my Jets. The Jets defense is brutal. Everyone gets home, right? Downs gets home. I think Alec Pierce might have had a decent game. Anthony Richardson looked amazing with like 28 fantasy points. And now this is what the Colts offense looks like with a Richardson stinker. Now, I will say, I don't want to do too much defending for Richardson because at a certain point, you just got to make the throws. But He had a drop touchdown pass. He had an incomplete dime down the sideline to Thielen, got 1 foot down. This is from Ian Hartitz. He had gains of 30, 21, 21, and 7 nullified by penalty. You have a Lions fan chiming in here saying that Richardson looked great if you actually watch the game, but there's only so much of that you can do. I will admit that. There's only so much, well, if you actually look at this, and that, Richardson looked great. At a certain point, it's got to come out on the football field. But in terms of the fantasy pieces, they didn't score a single touchdown in this game. Now, the Detroit Lions defense is the second best in the league in terms of EPA allowed. That's just offensive efficiency. So it would have been tough to expect much from anybody, but it wasn't great. Now, I will say the elephant in the room, right? The guy that we were drafting over Saquon, Jonathan Taylor, has been brutal. And I think it's fair to question whether he's even the same guy at this point, right? He had the ankle injury a couple of years ago. I think that he missed a few games this year. He was seen on the sideline, I think during the Jets game, taping up his ankle. The ankle issue is still there. He's not the same guy, and they're running him into the dirt, man. 96% of the snaps for Jonathan Taylor. He was out there more than anybody in Week 12, according to Jacob Gibbs, but still, that just wasn't enough. I think he got like 11 carries, and that was it, and he didn't really get home for you. He scored like maybe 10 PPR points at best here. I do want to pull up the box scores for you guys as well, and it's just brutal, man. He hasn't hit 15-plus PPR points since Week 8. He hasn't hit 20-plus since Week 3. So JT now gets kind of bumped down to like a mid-range RB2 that's kind of just reliant on volume and the game environment that the Colts are in. If they play a good defense, he is pretty much cooked there in that spot. Yeah, I just wanted to see. Yeah, he gave you 3.5 PPR points. Yeah, he gave you 11 carries, 35 rushing yards, no targets. That was it. I will say, Michael Pittman gets home. He gives you 7 targets, 6 catches, 96 yards. He's starting to return back to form. I was very loud about Michael Pittman potentially being hurt and he should be putting himself on IR. It seems like he's almost back at this point. The down part is that Downs gets hurt. It seems like it's going to be a short-term injury, but any game that Downs misses or any game that a receiver in this receiver room misses, A.D. Mitchell becomes a guy you can definitely flex moving forward. And then in terms of this Colts game, on the other side, Montgomery gets hurt, which is brutal, but then also Jahmyr Gibbs on a short week versus the Bears on Thursday could potentially get the entire workload of this backfield, and that would be somebody that you could project for like 20-plus points per game in a Detroit Lions offense that just scores 30-plus every week. So keep an eye on David Montgomery moving forward. Our fifth takeaway here is the Dolphins' offensive resurgence here, where Miami, since Tua returned in Week 8, shout out to Rich Rebar, he is the king of the stats, to be honest with you. They are second in the league behind just the Lions with 3.02 points per drive. The Dolphins have converted 55% of their third downs over that span, second in the league behind the Chiefs. So their offense is humming right now. Everything is clicking, and everyone got home besides Tyreek Hill. Tua gave you 4 passing touchdowns, 317 passing yards. Achane just 10 for 32 on the ground, but he did give you 24 yards, 2 touchdowns through the air. He gets home. And then, of course, you get the big Waddle day. 8 catches, 144 yards, a touchdown. Jonnu Smith, 9 catches, 87 yards, a touchdown. Tyreek Hill does not get there. Tyreek Hill has not hit 20-plus PPR points in a single game since Week 1. He has the weird wrist injury that he's been dealing with. It's tough. Receivers so bad this year that it gets very difficult to put Tyreek Hill less than or lower than wide receiver 8 or 9 rest of season, but he feels really brutal here moving forward, especially, you drafted him in the top 5 picks. He is not returning on that, even with the Dolphins offense getting better. Then our sixth takeaway here is the Bryce Young revival and the Jonathan Brooks debut. This is a chart here from Kevin Cole that takes into account EPA per play, offensive efficiency, PFF offensive grade, your your film grade here. And Bryce Young, right, like pretty much the way you would rank quarterback performances here is just by looking who becomes first on the dotted line, right? So it'd be Baker, then it'd be Darnold, and then you would have Young on kind of this plane with Winston, Jaden Daniels. And Bryce Young played really well. Now, it wasn't like the flashiest game, right, where he had a billion yards and 3 passing touchdowns, but he looked competent, man. He looked very good. 21 of 35 passing, 263 passing yards, a touchdown. He gave you 3 on the ground for 20 yards. He's obviously not someone you're really going to pick up in fantasy football, but this is good news for the Panthers offense in general. And honestly, good news for someone that I think everyone should be rooting for. This is somebody who was taken first overall and was kind of flushed out of the league very quickly. He goes toe-to-toe down to the wire against Mahomes. And it pretty much just came down to the fact that his defense couldn't keep Mahomes out of field goal range. Bryce Young answered the bell, did all he could. Now, in terms of the receiving usage here for the Carolina Panthers, it is very weird. We're seeing a lot of David Moore, man. And if you don't remember, like David Moore, it's one of the more random stories of this year. I really can't imagine that he has been like, I don't even know where he was at in 2023. 2023, his best game was 2 catches, 68 yards, and a touchdown. This year he comes out and he gives you 10 targets, 6 catches, 81 yards, and a touchdown for 20 plus PPR points this week. Now, of course, he's not someone you're going to like start moving forward. Like he's not a starter. He's like a desperation flex at best, but it is very interesting. The way that they've kind of leaned on veterans in this passing game. We'll see if Adam Thielen can pass David Moore for routes run. Will that come from Xavier Legette? We shall see. This is me talking off of the snap counts from over at PFF. And you can see on the bottom there, it's not really worth talking about Jonathan Brooks. He gets 5 snaps, 2 routes, 2 carries. That's it. He is not startable until further notice. A really brutal run out for Jonathan Brooks. On the other side, though, I will touch on for the Chiefs, DeAndre Hopkins, man, he goes from like 66% of the routes to like 55% to like 40%, and they're just not using him. He's like buried behind Justin Watson and Juju Smith-Schuster right now. I will say, there's something in his contract apparently that has been like a 60% snap share threshold, where if he crosses that, they have to spend up a different pick, and that could be what is keeping him from getting on the field, something that I haven't previously thought about, something to consider with DeAndre Hopkins in fantasy. He's somebody that, you know, after the Tampa Bay game where he scores 2 touchdowns, it's like, all right, this guy's a top 24 receiver rest of season. He is like a desperation flex play where you just kind of hope for a touchdown just based on that usage. Now, our 7th takeaway is the Bears' usage trends. They came out here, went toe-to-toe with the Vikings, one of the best defenses in the league, right? We've seen the Niners, we've seen the Texans, we've seen a lot of different offenses completely crater versus the Vikings. And the Bears didn't look like super pretty or amazing, but they held their own. Now, they fired Shane Waldron 2 weeks ago. They had last week's game and now this week's game in terms of putting together some kind of sample size moving forward for what we can expect from Bears OC Thomas Brown. And Ryan Heath has a good tweet here just showing what the target shares have been over the last 2 weeks. Keenan Allen has a 29.1% target share. Rome Odunze 25.3%. DJ Moore 17.7%. Cole Kmet 16.5%. So this is actually really good. Where it's like very consolidated around the top guys. There's no like random Gerald Everett targets. There's no random wide receiver 5 targets like we'll see in some offenses. This is good. Now, Keenan Allen actually went off. He gave you his second 20-plus PPR point game of the year. He has a great day. I think he had, I don't even know, he must have had, 15 targets in this one, man. 15 targets, 9 catches, 86 yards, a touchdown. Not super efficient on the day, but that's what Keenan Allen can give you, a nice veteran presence. It just seems like they're using players better here. And that's pretty funny for a guy in Thomas Brown who is known for his stint with the Panthers last year where the offense looked brutal. Now we look here, and DJ Moore is getting, like, this is ideal usage. Like, this is, you want, like, short stuff, and you also want, like, those big, swooping, like, crossers. Like, let him get, you want DJ Moore getting horizontal. That's, like, the big cheat code with DJ Moore, and he's tapped into that. 86 yards of his 106 yards came after the catch, 7 catches, 1 touchdown. So even with that low target share, right, 17.7%, if you have DJ Moore, you're like, oh shit, that's not very good. But they're throwing the ball a ton. Like 7 targets will do just fine. And he's also getting a carry in both of these games with Thomas Brown. So they're making it a emphasis to get him the ball on screens, in space, targets, stuff where he's going in motion, crossers. Like, this is beautiful for DJ Moore. So he gets an upgrade. I would say all these receivers now get an upgrade. It's not going to be this every week, right? I think Caleb Williams might have had 47 pass attempts. That's not going to sustain moving forward, but this is a good sign, man. They put up points. A bunch of their pass catchers got home versus a very good defense in the Vikings. And Caleb looked good as well, man. 340 yards, 2 passing touchdowns, 0 interceptions. He had 33 rushing yards, no turnovers. And if we want to look at the Kevin Colts chart here, you can see Caleb Williams is in a fine spot, right? He's like right there with like Stafford, ahead of Hurts, ahead of Goff this week. Like this is probably one of the best games for Caleb Williams. Again, we've seen him pop off, but that was against your, I think the Rams might have been, or no, the Rams weren't one, but they had it against like the Jaguars and a bunch of bad teams he really popped off against. But this is the first one against a real defense that he looked good. Yeah, it was the Panthers, it was the Jaguars. He goes on bye, he struggles, and now now we're seeing the Caleb that was drafted first overall. And now if you want to make the case for him to be QB1 in this draft class moving forward, I would certainly hear you out, but I would be slightly hesitant. And then we'll also touch on the running backs on this team. Last week we saw Roschon Johnson get a lot of passing down work and get a lot of short yardage work, and that still held true, where you can see here from a utilization report that Roschon had 80% plus of the 2-minute drill stuff, the long down and distance. Then he also had 100% of the inside the 5 attempts. Now, the short yardage stuff split 60-40 in favor of DeAndre Swift. DeAndre Swift also got 72% of the rush attempts instead of 48%. And then that's going to do it, right? Where he's now getting like 70% of the rush attempts. He's getting some of the short yardage stuff. It's still not the perfect role of all time, like the greatest role of all time, but it is better than what he had last week. So you can give a slight upgrade to DeAndre Swift, but I will still say, well, he had 9.5 PPR points, 13 for 30 with 3 catches. So the usage was slightly better, and it's something to monitor moving forward, but I still wouldn't give him a huge upgrade. Now, I know a lot of people wanted me to talk about Justin Jefferson in this game. Ron, what's going on with J-Jeff? It's kind of just that defenses are seeking him out, and it seems like Kevin O'Connell doesn't mind, right? Like, it seems like Jefferson, I think he had some quotes after this game where he's fine not being the main course. He's fine as long as his team wins and they keep winning games. And Hawkinson got home, Addison got home, Aaron Jones got home. And it's just one of those games where the Bears seemed like their game plan was take away Jefferson, and the Vikings were happy to do so and win the game that way. So it's tough for me to say, like, yeah, Jefferson will definitely bounce back next week, but it's also tough for me to say, like, panic on Justin Jefferson. It's just kind of how these games have been going. I will say that the funny part about Jefferson is if you faded him, it was for Sam Darnold when it really should have been for Brian Flores, where Flores's defense has been so good that it's kind of keeping these games like low scoring. I know this one definitely went over. It was like, 27-27 going into overtime, but there has been some of these games this year where the Vikings defense has kind of made it so they don't even have to lean on Jefferson at the end of a game. Then we have our 8th takeaway. The Seahawks offense goes hungry. And this one is tough, man. I know a lot of people want me to touch on DK Metcalf, Kenneth Walker. I think this also goes back to the Saquon stuff, where Kenneth Walker was a young upside running back. Of course, we weren't drafting Walker over Saquon, but the idea is why take Saquon here if I can just take Kenneth Walker later, right? That's kind of a little bit of the train of thought, and this is why. The Seahawks offense isn't amazing, right? Just 16 points in this game, and their rushing offense, right? Their offensive line is nowhere near as good as the Eagles, so you're going to get 2.6 yards per carry from Kenneth Walker. This is great usage for Walker, by the way. 16 carries, he gets 6 targets. If you told me that in the offseason, I would say sign me up. That's exactly what we want for Kenneth Walker, but there was no efficiency across the board for him, and it was just another 13-point game. So he is now, he started the season hot, Walker, as someone that, could he be a legendary running back this season? And he has completely cooled off. He has not hit 20-plus PPR points since week 7. Now, I still think that's good usage, and he'll have his games moving forward, but you get these lows when the offense scores 16 points. Something to think about here. Just 22 points total in this game. Now, we can flip over to the passing game here. 254 yards for Geno, 1 touchdown, 1 pick. And JSN, man, even in games with Metcalf, he's come through the last 2 weeks. He had 7 targets, 6 catches, 77 yards, and a touchdown in this game. That was good for 19.7 PPR points. The week before, with Metcalf, he had 11 targets. He hits 21.8 PPR points without a single touchdown. I'm very impressed, man. He is the wide receiver 15 in points per game at 15.2 points per game, even with a bunch of games, probably half of them with Metcalf at this point. Now, Metcalf, it's tough to keep on telling you guys, like, just believe with Metcalf, but 4 catches, 59 yards, 5 targets here. Not the end of the world. I do want to say, he had 5 of 28 targets, 18% target share. Not the best, not the worst, but I do think better days are ahead for him, but he probably goes down to, a wide receiver 2. But the season has been this way where, what does wide receiver 2 even look like, right? Like, a lot of these guys are in the wide receiver 2 range of, like, McLaurin, Malik Neighbors, George Pickens, Zay Flowers, and week to week, there's just not a lot of sustainability, right? I mentioned McLaurin, who comes through on that last play of the game, but before that, it was looking brutal for McLaurin. So a lot of these guys, wide receivers just not as strong, and that's what happens when you lose Rashee Rice and you lose Chris Godwin and a lot of these top guys. And you lose quarterbacks too, right? Where, Tommy DeVito's the quarterback. And then now you have Brandon Allen as quarterback, where Jawan Jennings was looking good for a second. So wide receiver's tough, and DK Metcalf, it's frustrating, but he's still someone that has to go in your lineup every week. And I'm not going to move into like wide receiver 30. And I will say, I think that the talking point will be rest of season and for week 13, do you rank Metcalf ahead or behind of JSN? And I'm not sure yet until I sit down and do rankings and I look at like a lot of those things that I do is I'll look at like FanDuel, underdog projections, whatever, in terms of how many receiving yards are each receiver projected for. And that'll be something that kind of points me in that direction. I would still kind of default to Metcalf, but JSN is going to be right there next to him no matter what at this point. Now, our 9th takeaway is the Broncos offense. And Bo Nix has been unbelievable. People keep saying that. I think it's pretty corny, but I had to just sort of sneak that in. And you can see here, when we look at that Kevin Cole chart for the entire season, I have red arrows pointing to all the rookie quarterbacks. If you wanted to make the case for Bo Nix as, Daniels at this point, I know that he came through yesterday, but a lot of it came in the fourth quarter, and Cliff Kingsbury offenses have been looking, really bad end of the season. The Kingsbury curse has been looking really bad for Jaden Daniels up until pretty much the fourth quarter yesterday. Maybe that's a spark moving forward, but you could make the case that Jaden Daniels is no longer as separated as he once was, and if you want to make the case for Nix, you certainly can. Like, he has just been such a dog, man. In terms of PFF grade, in terms of EP per play, in terms of fantasy output, he's the QB9 in points per game. He had 273 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks. And the beauty of Bo Nix, we keep harping on, is just 1 sack against, now of course the Raiders defense isn't amazing, but they have Max Crosby. He is so good at not taking bad sacks. Like, that is the biggest issue with a lot of these guys who don't work out, right? When you look at Justin Fields or Zach Wilson, is you take a sack and you completely stall a drive. You completely stall a drive. If you go from 1st and 10 to 2nd and 22, you're punting, especially with a young rookie quarterback. So if you can find a way to just take 1 sack, no picks, no turnovers, 270 yards and 2 touchdowns, like, that's all you can ask for from a rookie quarterback. Now, if you want to get into the dynasty aspects of, or the NFL franchise aspects of him being damn near 25 years old, and how much more upside does he have than what he's doing right now, we can talk about that at a later date, but what he's doing right now is very, very impressive. And you also have Cortland Sutton, man. 8 catches, 97 yards, 2 touchdowns. He's been on a tear recently. He's now the wide receiver 24 in points per game, but keeps on climbing. And this Denver offense has been one of the bigger revelations this season. Now, what has not been a revelation has been their running backs, man. Their running backs, just brutal. Brutal stuff, despite this actually being a good offense. This is actually one of the funnier ones where McLaughlin passed over Estime this week from the utilization report. You can see McLaughlin goes from 11% of the snaps, 13%, up to 29%, with Estime at the bottom there down to 8% of the snaps. But look at the opportunities. Javonte had 12. Jaleel McLaughlin had 8. Estime had 3. None of them are startable. I imagine a lot of you guys, or not a lot of you guys, but some of you guys are in a spot where, maybe this week with Biomageddon, you had to start Javonte. It's kind of just what happens in fantasy football. When you start Javonte at this point, you're saying a prayer. It's just kind of what it comes down to. He goes off in matchups you'd never start him in, right? It was a Thursday night game where he, went crazy. And there's some other times where it's a great matchup on paper versus a Raiders defense that hasn't been amazing, and he sucks. And I will say as well, Amir Abdullah did really well in this game. He had only 8 carries for 28 yards, but 5 catches, 37 yards, a touchdown. He gave you 17.45 PPR points, and that's probably just fine. He played 90% of the snaps. They still clearly don't trust Dylan Laube, who had no offensive snaps, no carries, nothing. He did have 1 kick return for 59 yards, but they do not trust Laube in this offense, which is disappointing. He was one of these guys that a lot of us thought offseason could be, like Bucky Irving, like Tyrone Tracy, one of these day 3 guys that makes an impact. He has not been that whatsoever. They just simply do not trust him. Now, our last takeaway of the day, 49ers without Purdy. I did a similar chart like we did with the Giants, and this one's brutal, man. Brandon Allen, passing yards goes from 251 to 197. Rushing yards goes from 147 to 44. And that was the biggest thing for me, is even with McCaffrey, this rushing offense was not good without Brock Purdy. Now, you can also put some of that on the Trent Williams injury. Trent Williams has not been playing. His injury is very unclear, and that also affects the offense as well. Points per game goes from 25 to 10. Plays per game goes from 62 to 47. So they're not sustaining drives. They're not scoring points. They're not putting up yards. Really bad across the board. Now, Kyle Shanahan is a serial liar. I don't know what to believe in terms of what he says. He says here, Purdy should be able to return in week 13, but he had Tommy John on this right arm. He now has a shoulder injury in his right arm. I don't know. We drafted the guy first overall, Christian McCaffrey, because Kyle Shanahan said everything would be okay. So I don't believe any of this stuff. I'm operating under the assumption that Brock Purdy is probably not going to be around here. I would love to be wrong. I would love to come back next week and be like, psych, Purdy's in there, everything's fine. But there's just no guarantee. If we look at the PFF usage stuff as well in terms of their routes run and carries, we can get some insights here, right? Juwan Jennings still the leader in targets. Him and George Kittle were tied. Juwan Jennings still gave you 5 catches for 40 yards, which is like, it's fine, but it's not going to do anything for you really. Debo gives you 4 targets. He's been brutal. You think that they would give him more like layups in this scenario? They did not. McCaffrey gave you 11 carries, 4 targets. He is now at 13 points per game through 3 games, Christian McCaffrey, so he has been brutal. It's tough to say how much with McCaffrey. Is he coming off injury? Is he old and washed up? It's too early to really tell. But McCaffrey's like trending towards not being a first-round pick next year, or like being like a late first. It's like super, super risky. Kittle, of course, he's the truth. He scores a touchdown. He is bulletproof at this point. And then again, the Trent Williams injury is brutal. So Juwan Jennings becomes like a wide receiver 3. Debo's like a boom-bust wide receiver 3. Kittle's still a top 6 tight end. McCaffrey, brutal. Like a high-end RB2 maybe. I mean, he got 15 touches in this game, but it just was not good. You also had Jordan Mason mix in. He actually had a nice run that he broke off for a long gain. There is a scenario here that plays out where they're no longer in the playoffs. They shut down McCaffrey, and then Jordan Mason becomes like a league winner down the stretch. That's just something I've been daydreaming about. But there's really not much to be said here about the 49ers. I will say as well, the Packers, Josh Jacobs is on a heater. He scored 3 touchdowns here. He's been at 20-plus in, I want to say like 4 of his last 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 4 of his last 5. He's been over 20 PPR points. He gets Miami next week. He is, separating himself ahead of your Jonathan Taylors as like a back-end RB1. He's averaging like 16.5 PPR points. And I will be honest, like this is more of what I imagined for Saquon, was this Josh Jacobs, like he's been good, but he hasn't been crushing you. Saquon, of course, is a different caliber of talent than Josh Jacobs. And that is just very clear. But we also have the wide receivers for Green Bay. I think Romeo Doubs had a head injury. We'll see how long that lasts. We'll see kind of what that means moving forward if he gets cleared for this upcoming game. Then they play on Thursday on a short week. So we'll talk about that definitely tomorrow on the waiver wire video. But that would be good news for Jaden Reed, who's been brutal. Christian Watson, who had, that drop. If any of you guys had him in your lineup and like that costed you, I am very sorry. It costed me, the team we drafted, me, Jacob, and Liam. We had Christian Watson. If he catches that, we're in the playoffs. We are now not. So brutal runouts across the board. Dontavion Wicks' season, maybe in the best ball streets, my most drafted best ball player, could benefit from this Dobbs injury, but also just hope that Dobbs is okay. But that's going to do it for us today. That was our top 10 fantasy football lessons learned for week 12 of the fantasy football season. We'll have a waiver wire video tomorrow, but then after that, we just have, Thanksgiving. I'll have all my weekly rankings out on the Patreon as well. But videos probably won't be back until lessons learned for next Monday. So, as always, I appreciate you guys watching, and I will see y'all in the next one.
Stones, like this froze, ice cold, ice around my body like